Okay, so welcome. This is Global Perspectives' first interview with Professor Joel Westheimer. Welcome.
Hey, welcome. Thanks.
He is the University Research Chair with University of Ottawa in the Sociology of Education. He explores the ways of educational theorists conceive of teaching democracy and the ways school practices embrace or challenge these conceptions. He focuses on how to teach democratic values while continuing to clarify what people mean by democracy. So, our question here today is, how does faith in schools affect the quality of democratic education? So, in Ontario, there's been the issue that during the last election about faith-based schools, and that kind of got the Conservatives in a little bit of heat. And I was wondering how you find that faith-based schooling has affected voluntary education and education abroad.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Well, first of all, I'm no expert in faith-based education, but what I can say is the kind of tensions that surround these issues of publicly funded religious education, which is what we have here in Ontario. And it's an unusual setup because there are some places in the world, like the Netherlands, where religiously based education is funded equally publicly. So any school, whether it's a Jewish day school or a Catholic school, can receive government funding for public education. And that's generally considered a fairly democratic system. There's other places, the United States, for example, where faith-based education is specifically not publicly funded. So some grants and certain smaller portions of public funding can go to Catholic schools or to Jewish day schools or to Muslim schools in the U.S. But the government cannot fund religious schools in the United States. And in Canada, it's a mixed bag depending on which province you're in. Here in Ontario, there's this unusual situation where Catholic education is publicly funded, but other religious institutional schools are not publicly funded. Ultimately, this was a compromise with Quebec, and it has some historical reasons. I don't think that ultimately it's sustainable long term in a democratic society, because it clearly it has some anti-democratic issues with it. Now that said, well, do you want to?
No, that's wonderful.
Okay.
So we had that said. I guess we're looking at that trends in the future, and you're saying it's not sustainable. And is there things that religious education can do to be sustainable, or is there ways to bridge that gap in schooling that we currently have?
Well, first of all, so here in Ottawa, we have 4 different school boards, right? The French, what's called public, but they're all public. But the French public, the English public, the French Catholic, and the English Catholic. So, of course, with 4 different school boards, you have an enormous amount of overhead, and it's costly. And so in times of fiscal, austerity, which is what we're in now, certain things are looked at and certain things aren't. Now, religious education has been a kind of political football that no one wants to touch for political reasons. On the other hand, it is clearly an area that is just waiting for someone to identify as a kind of set of wasted resources, because we have 4 sets of administration, 4 sets of everything in a school board that really could be easily trimmed to 2, if not 1 giant school board. So that's, first of all, looking forward. I think that the thing that will probably push it to the political forefront is money, financial issues. Now, Catholic education itself, or religious education, when you brought up at the beginning, has a lot of interesting things that non-religious education doesn't, and there's some real strengths that I think the public system could learn from Catholic education. many researchers have looked, especially in the US, at Catholic schools as institutions that have a strong sense of community, where students and teachers work together really well, and they share a common set of values and a common set of goals. And that's something that school reformers really try and achieve across the board. And so that's something that Catholic schools and Jewish day schools and other religiously oriented schools have done quite well at in fostering that sense of belonging and a sense of community. The problem is, as any anthropologist would tell you, that a community, we like to think of communities as all-inclusive and everyone can join, but the strength of a community is sort of defined by who is kept out, right?
Yes.
And of course, religious schools are no different. I mean, the reason that those bonds are so strong, in part, is because they share a common set of values, which means that people who don't share those values are not welcome members of the community, and that's where the difficulty begins when you're talking about public education.
Yeah, it's very interesting you say that, because I went to a Catholic school in Ottawa, and Catholic high school, St. Patrick's High School, and the funniest thing is that throughout my education, I found there were more and more students of not Catholic faith who would come to school with hijabs and come to school with different religions, and they would start giving importance even during the masses, during school times, to doing Muslim prayer, to having those times. And I personally didn't know what to think, because number one, I'm not Catholic. I was going to a Catholic school, and I was a United church member, and that's where I've always been. But I always thought it was odd. But on the other hand, when I think about it, it's the only sustainable way that they're gonna.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of leaders in various religious school movements they prefer other religions to no religion. So they're unified in the sense that they think that spirituality, that worship, that reflection, and all of these things should be a part of one's education. And so, a student from a Muslim background or students from Jewish background might have more in common. They might be more welcome than students from completely secular or atheist or agnostic backgrounds, because there's that common sense of search for, a sense of meaning and place in society. And you probably found that in your experience.
Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll tell you one other thing,
sure.
Peter, that is it's easy to talk about the shortcomings of religious education in a democratic society, because if people don't share those beliefs, you run into problems. So it's easy to talk about things like, well, kids who go to Catholic schools might not get as much exposure to multiple perspectives, and many people make those accusations. And in some areas, I think that that's probably true. However, the way the public schools have handled controversial issues may be the only thing that's worse. And that is to simply avoid them altogether.
Yes.
So Catholic schools delve right into controversial issues, abortion, homosexuality, and some of them they say, here's the right answer, right? And so other people come in and say, well, how can you say that's the right answer? People have different beliefs. Public schools, on the other hand, simply say, you can't talk about that here. Which is not a great solution.
No, like at least they offer some kind of response to it instead of just
exactly. And they do ask students to explore those issues, even if they don't give them the full multiple perspectives that they might deserve. They have students recognize that spirituality, religion, issues of family, issues of the larger meaning of life are bigger than, are big questions that deserve study.
Absolutely. And I can attest to that. I went to the Catholic school, and I felt that way all the time, where I had to wrestle with these questions, and sometimes I felt like I didn't have to wrestle with the questions, but yet I would come back and they'd always be there. They wouldn't be hiding. I wouldn't have to go searching for them. They would come to me.
Yeah.
Whereas when I was doing my practicum in a public school, it did feel like that there was a lack of it. It wasn't acknowledged. It was put in the background. And so, do you think that public schools can make that jump to, let's say, if they do end up in the long run that it's just public schools, can they make that jump to bringing in faith to that? Bringing in faith into their curriculum a little more? Is that because it seems like that seems to be like a strength to them?
I don't know that I would call it faith. I don't think that public schools should be in the business of trafficking in faith. What I think that what I would like to see public schools pay much more attention to are questions that possess us all, right? What's the meaning of life? Why are we here?
So spiritual questions.
Yeah, big questions. So questions that also ask students to move beyond themselves. Right now, schools, in particularly non-religious schools, but all schools to some extent, are very focused on individualistic goals. They're becoming more and more career training institutions, and less about kind of a broad liberal education for life. And religious schools still explore those big questions, and public schools probably should do a lot more of that, not from a religious or a faith-based perspective, but from the perspective that these are forces that drive human beings and have for centuries, if millennia.
So I guess it's accepting that it's not. I hate to characterize it as airy-fairy and not of value as what maybe it is currently characterized in schools, and putting a little more value into valuing it as a writing outlet, or valuing it as an oral outlet to express it that way, and not to poo-poo it and say that it's not right for the.
I mean, most parents, what they want for their children are for them to lead happy, productive, and healthy lives, and to be in loving relationships, and to be a part of something bigger than themselves, and all those things that we know give meaning to human beings. And public schools have shied away from a huge part of that equation, and focused in, especially in the last 10 or 20 years of school reform, have focused in very narrowly on some very, very specific goals, namely math and literacy. And that's been to the detriment of including other goals, like not only other subject areas, but these larger questions of life that could benefit student exploration. And the current way that public schools deal with these kind of contentious issues is to simply pretend they're not there. And that's probably not a healthy response.
I completely agree. I think at that we'll call it a wrap.
All right.
And we really appreciate Joel for joining us. And thank you very much.
You're
welcome.
Really appreciate
Peter.
it. All right. Thanks for doing this.